My name is Henry, but tonight's letter isn't about me. It's about a man who thought he was doing the right thing, showing up with generosity, with love, with sacrifice, and instead was told he wasn't welcome. It's a story about fathers, children, and the price of being pushed away when all you wanted was to help. He sent me his words because he didn't know where else to put the pain. And as I read them, I realized he was speaking for countless mothers and fathers who have given until their hands were empty, only to be met with closed doors. And before I share his story, let me remind you, if these letters speak to you, if you've ever seen your own family in these words, go ahead and subscribe. It helps keep these stories alive, so no one feels they're going through this alone. Here is his letter. I had saved for years, not for myself, but for my grandson's education. $10,000. I tucked away a little at a time, skipping vacations, patching shoes instead of buying new ones, eating soup for dinner when steak would fit in the budget. Every sacrifice felt worth it because I believed one day I'd hand over that check and my family would understand that love isn't just words, it's action. The day finally came. My grandson had been accepted into college, a proud moment for the whole family. My heart swelled just thinking of him walking across campus, head held high, carrying not just his books but the legacy of every sacrifice that came before. I wrote the check carefully, steadying my hand so the numbers wouldn't blur. $10,000. A lifetime of love in a single piece of paper. I drove across town with the check folded neatly in an envelope, tucked into my jacket pocket like a secret treasure. I rehearsed the words I might say when I handed it over. Maybe something simple like, "This is for his future." Maybe I'd tell him, "Your grandfather believes in you." I imagined the hug, the tears, the gratitude. But when I knocked on the door, it wasn't my grandson who answered. It was my daughter-in-law. Her expression was tight, guarded, like a gate that only opens for certain people. I smiled anyway, holding up the envelope. "I brought something for him," I said softly. "For college." She didn't even look at the envelope. She crossed her arms and said words I'll never forget. "You're not welcome here." At first, I thought I'd misheard. Maybe she meant they were busy. Maybe another day would be better. But her eyes told me the truth, hard, cold, unyielding. "You need to leave," she said. "We don't need you showing up uninvited." The envelope in my hand felt suddenly heavy, like it was filled with bricks instead of hope. I tried to explain, tried to tell her this was for her son, for his education, for his future. But she cut me off. I said, "You're not welcome. Please respect that." The door closed before I could finish. I stood there, the autumn air sharp against my face, my hand still holding the envelope that no one had taken. Behind that door was my grandson's future, and I was barred from it. I walked back to my car, the check burning in my pocket. I sat behind the wheel for a long time, staring at the house that used to feel like part of me. My chest ached, not just from rejection, but from confusion. What had I done to deserve this? Was generosity now an offense? As I drove home, I thought about all the times I'd shown up, holidays, birthdays, emergencies. Every time I'd been there, and yet, in the moment that should have been a bridge, I was treated like a stranger at the gate. That night, I placed the envelope on my desk. I didn't rip it. I didn't throw it away. I just left it there, untouched, as a reminder, not of the rejection, but of my love. Because the truth is, the love behind that check can't be canceled by someone else's cruelty. But something in me shifted that day. Something deep. I realized family isn't just blood. It's respect. It's gratitude. And when those are gone, the door feels heavier than any lock could make it. I didn't come from money. I came from long days in steel-toed boots and nights where the bills were stacked higher than the groceries. Every dollar I earned carried calluses on it. And yet, through all those years, I held on to one dream, that my grandchildren would never know the same weight. When my first grandson was born, I made a quiet promise to myself. Every month, no matter how tight things got, I'd set something aside. Sometimes it was $100. Sometimes it was $20. There were months when it was only coins in a jar. But slowly, steadily, it grew. I told no one. Not my son. Not my daughter-in-law. Not even my closest friends. This was between me, the Lord, and the child whose future I want to protect. By the time he turned 18, the sum had become $10,000, a number that felt impossible once, now sitting in my account like a silent miracle. When I went to the bank to write the cashier's check, the teller smiled and said, "College fund?" I nodded, pride warming me. "For my grandson," I said. The words tasted good, like something earned. At home, I took a plain white envelope from Eleanor's old stationery box. She'd been gone 10 years now, but I still use her things when I want a touch of grace. On the front, I wrote his name in careful script. I slid the check inside, sealed it, and pressed my palm against it for a moment. It felt like placing a blessing into paper. That night, I barely slept. I kept picturing his face when I handed it over. The surprise, the gratitude, maybe even tears. I thought about him buying books without worry, paying tuition on time, maybe even treating himself to something small, a pizza with friends, a jacket for the winter. It wasn't just money. It was freedom. The next morning, I dressed in my best coat, the one Eleanor used to call my Sunday suit. I ironed the shirt, polished the shoes. It wasn't vanity, it was ceremony. This wasn't just an errand. It was a moment. The drive across town felt longer than usual. My hands rested on the steering wheel, but my mind wandered through years of memories. The time I babysat him when he was 5, and he fell asleep on my chest during a thunderstorm. The time I bought him his first bike and ran down the street, holding the seat until he found his balance. The look on his face when he called me, "Grandpa, you're the best." Those moments weren't small. They were the bricks and the foundation of our bond. When I pulled into their driveway, I paused for a moment before turning off the engine. I looked at the envelope resting on the passenger seat. $10,000. A lifetime of love disguised as ink and paper. I whispered a small prayer. "Lord, let them see my heart." Then I stepped out. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the smell of leaves and distant wood smoke. I walked up the path, rehearsing in my head what I might say. Maybe something simple. Maybe just handing it over with a smile and letting the gift speak for itself. When I knocked, I half expected my grandson to answer. I pictured his wide grin, his eager voice, the way he always used to run into my arms. Instead, the door opened to his mother, my daughter-in-law. Her eyes narrowed the moment she saw me, as if I were a salesman arriving uninvited. Still, I smiled and held up the envelope. "I brought something for him," I said softly. "For college." She didn't glance at the envelope, didn't soften at my words. Instead, she crossed her arms like a gate being locked. Her voice was flat. "You're not welcome here." The words hit harder than any punch I'd ever taken. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. I stammered, I just wanted to give this to him, for his education." But she shook her head, her face like stone. "We don't need you showing up uninvited. Please respect that." I felt the world tilt under me. The envelope in my hand grew heavy, almost unbearable. I tried one more time. "It's for him, for his future. Please, just take it." The door moved, slow at first, then faster, until it closed with a thud that echoed in my chest. I stood there on the porch, staring at the wood grain of a door that once opened with warmth. My hand still held the envelope, my knuckles white. Behind that door was my grandson, the boy I had prayed for, worked for, sacrificed for. And yet, I wasn't allowed inside. The walk back to my car felt like miles. The autumn leaves crunched under my shoes, each step a reminder that some seasons end whether you're ready or not. I slid into the driver's seat and stared at the house. My throat tightened, my chest ached. I thought about leaving the envelope in the mailbox or tucking it under the mat, but something in me resisted, not because I want to keep the money, but because I couldn't bear to have my gift treated like an unwanted package. So I placed it back on the passenger seat. The drive home was silent. No music, no radio, just the sound of my own breath, shallow and uneven. When I got home, I laid the envelope on my desk. I didn't tear it. I didn't hide it. I just left it there, staring back at me like a question I couldn't yet answer. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Today I tried to give my grandson a future. Instead, I was told I wasn't welcome. I closed the book and sat in the quiet, wondering how love could be so heavy in my hands and yet so invisible to theirs. The morning after I was turned away, the envelope still sat on my desk. I couldn't bring myself to move it. It was as if touching it would make the rejection real again. I walked past it on my way to the kitchen, poured my coffee, sat by the window, and told myself it had just been a misunderstanding. Maybe she was having a bad day. Maybe the stress of college paperwork had gotten to her. Maybe, just maybe, she hadn't meant what she said. I wanted to believe that. Lord, I wanted to believe it. But the phone never rang. Not that day, not the next. Not from my son, not from my grandson, not even from her. Silence is its own kind of answer, and this one was loud. By the third day, I caved and called my son myself. When he answered, his tone was cheerful but distracted. "Hey, Dad, everything okay?" I hesitated, then said, "I stopped by the other day. I had something for him. Your wife told me I wasn't welcome." There was a pause. Too long a pause. Then he cleared his throat. "Yeah, about that. She just thought it wasn't the right time. Things have been hectic." The right time? I repeated. I had a check for his education, for his future. When is it not the right time for that? He sighed. "Dad, it's not about the money. We need boundaries." The word stung. "Boundaries?" I said softly. "Do boundaries mean keeping a grandfather on the porch while his grandson is inside?" He tried to soften it. "You're taking it too personally." Too personally. The words burned. How else is a man supposed to take being told he isn't welcome? How else can you interpret the closing of a door in your face? I ended the call quickly, before the hurt in my chest could turn into anger in my voice. The days dragged on. Every morning, I checked the mailbox, hoping for a note, a card, any acknowledgement. Nothing. I picked up the phone more times than I care to admit. Tempted to call again. Each time I stopped myself. I'd already been told where I stood. Still, the mind plays tricks when the heart is aching. I found myself rehearsing excuses for them. Maybe they didn't understand the sacrifice behind that check. Maybe they thought I was trying to buy affection. Maybe they just didn't realize that behind the money was love. But in the quiet hours of the night, I knew better. If love was what they saw, they wouldn't have shut the door. On Sunday, I went to church. Same pew, same hymns, same old jokes from the men by the coffee urn. But when someone asked if I was excited about my grandson's college, I felt my throat tighten. I lied and said, "Very proud." I didn't tell them the truth. That pride had been buried under humiliation. After the service, I drove by my son's house, telling myself it was coincidence. The driveway was full of cars. Laughter drifted out from the open windows. They were hosting friends, maybe family from her side. I sat across the street for a moment, engine idling, wondering how many stories were being told around that table. Stories I wasn't part of. I went home and wrote in my journal again. Silence can be crueler than words. At least words tell you where you stand. Silence makes you guess. The excuses began trickling in a few days later. A text from my son. "Sorry for the other day. Dad. Things have been stressful." She didn't mean it the way it sounded. I stared at the words, read them 3 times, and still couldn't find an apology. She didn't mean it? She looked me in the eye. She said it plain. Another text came later. "We'll come by soon, okay? Just busy with college prep." Soon never came. I thought about calling my grandson directly, but something held me back. Was it loyalty to his parents? Or fear of hearing in his voice the same rejection I'd seen in hers? Either way, I stayed silent. The envelope remained on my desk, a quiet witness to every unanswered call, every missing apology. The house felt emptier than ever. I tried to fill it with small routines, watering Eleanor's plants, polishing the silver, even baking her old pumpkin bread recipe. But nothing could silence the question that kept circling in my head. How did I go from being the man they turned to for help to the man they turned away at the door? One evening, I sat on the porch with the envelope in my lap. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and orange. Neighbors walked by with dogs, waving politely. I waved back, smiling the kind of smile you wear like armor. Inside, I was unraveling. I thought back to the day my son was born. I remembered holding him for the first time, vowing to always be there. I thought of the years I worked double shifts so he could play sports, so he'd never know hunger. I thought of Eleanor, rocking him to sleep, whispering promises into his tiny ear. And I realized I had kept my promise. I had been there. Always. The betrayal wasn't that they didn't need me anymore. The betrayal was that they didn't want me. That night, I finally picked up the envelope and placed it in the drawer beside my will. Not as a gift waiting to be given, but as a decision waiting to be made. Because silence had spoken louder than words, and excuses had explained nothing. And I knew the time was coming when my love, written in ink, would no longer be theirs to claim. The drawer where I placed the envelope might as well have been a vault. Every time I walked past it, I felt its weight, not just a weight of paper and ink, but of promises broken and dignity bruised. The house was quiet, but the silence didn't feel restful anymore. It felt like a verdict. I tried to busy myself with chores. I fixed a loose board on the porch, mended a tear in an old jacket, even polished Eleanor's china. But every task led me back to the same thought. I wasn't welcome in my own family's home. The mind has a way of turning one wound into a mirror for all the others. Soon, I wasn't just thinking about that day on the porch. I was remembering every time I'd been set aside, diminished, treated as an afterthought, like the Christmas when I bought my grandson a guitar because he'd begged for lessons. He opened it, his eyes shining, but my daughter-in-law frowned. "It's too loud," she said. "We'll keep it at your house." The guitar never left my living room. Or the time I showed up to a school play without being told the tickets had to be reserved in advance. I waited in the lobby while everyone else watched him sing. My son apologized later, but the damage was done. Back then, I brushed those things off. Families have friction, I told myself. It didn't mean they didn't love me. But now, staring at that drawer, I saw the pattern. Little by little, I had been pushed to the margins. Until finally, the margins became the outside. One evening, I drove past their house again. Lights glowed in every window. Cars filled the driveway. Through the curtains, I caught glimpses of laughter, of plates being passed, of glasses raised in toast. It wasn't Thanksgiving, but it might as well have been. And I was parked across the street, an uninvited spectator in a life I helped build. For a moment, I considered walking up, knocking, demanding to be let in. But then I thought of her face, cold and closed, and I couldn't bear the humiliation of hearing those words again. "You're not welcome here." So I drove away. At home, I poured a glass of whiskey I hadn't touched since Eleanor died. I sat at the table, the envelope in front of me, and whispered aloud, "What did I do wrong?" The walls didn't answer. A week later, my son finally called. His voice was softer this time, almost apologetic. "Dad, listen, she didn't mean it like that. Things just got out of hand. You know how stressful this transition is." I let him talk. Excuses flowed like water, but none of them washed away the sting. When he finished, I asked quietly, "Do you think I'm a danger to your family?" "Of course not," he said quickly. "Then why am I treated like one?" Silence. Long enough for me to know he didn't have an answer. Finally, he said, "Dad, just give it time." I looked at the envelope on the desk. "I've given years," I said, "and time doesn't seem to be fixing anything." We said goodbye, but the word fell hollow. That night, I dreamed of Eleanor. In the dream, she was setting the Thanksgiving table, humming the hymn she always hummed when she cooked. I walked in, ready to sit down, but every chair was full. She looked at me and said gently, "There's no place for you here." I woke with tears on my pillow and the taste of loneliness thick in my mouth. The next morning, I pulled out the yellow legal pad I'd once used for grocery lists and started writing. Not chores, not bills, memories. Each line a moment where I had been there for them, contrasted with a moment where they had not been there for me. Paid rent when they were short, was told I interfere, drove them to the hospital when the baby was coming, was left off the baptism photos, saved for college for 18 years, was told I wasn't welcome at the door. By the time I reached the bottom of the page, my hands were shaking, not from age, but from truth, Written out like that, the story was undeniable. This wasn't about one bad day. It was about years of being tolerated, not treasured. That evening, I sat on the porch and watched the sun sink behind the trees. Neighbors walked by, some waving, some not. I wondered if they knew, if they could sense that the man on the porch wasn't just old, he was exiled. And then a thought came sharp and clear. If they don't want my presence, why should they expect my legacy? It wasn't born of spite. It wasn't about revenge. It was about fairness, about truth. I had spent a lifetime giving, and still I was treated as though my worth was conditional. Well, love may be unconditional, but inheritance is not. I walked back inside, opened the drawer, and took out the envelope. I held it in both hands, then placed it beside my will. The two sat together like puzzle pieces waiting to be arranged, and I knew with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The breaking point had come. I wouldn't beg for a chair at the table. I would build my own. The breaking point doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it comes with a calm so steady it frightens the people who are used to your silence. I had carried enough silence. One Saturday afternoon, I drove back to their house. Not with a check in my pocket this time. It stayed in the drawer beside my will, but with my voice. I told myself I didn't need to be cruel. I just needed to be clear. When I knocked, it was my son who answered. His face flickered between surprise and unease. "Dad, what are you doing here?" I met his eyes. "We need to talk." He hesitated, then stepped aside. The living room smelled of cinnamon candles and fresh paint. My grandson was in the corner, hunched over a laptop. He looked up, smiled faintly, then looked quickly back down, as if afraid a smile might get him in trouble. My daughter-in-law entered from the kitchen, drying her hands. Her jaw tightened the moment she saw me. We weren't expecting visitors. "I won't stay long," I said evenly. "I only came to make myself understood." We sat, my son perched on the arm of a chair, fidgeting. She stood, arms crossed, like a judge already certain of the verdict. I took a breath. For 18 years I saved for his education. $10,000. I came here to give it to him, and you told me I wasn't welcome. Her lips pressed into a line. It wasn't about the money. It was about boundaries. I leaned forward slightly. Boundaries keep out danger. Do you see me as danger? She shifted, glanced at my son. He looked down. Do you think my presence harms your home? I pressed. She exhaled sharply. It complicates things. Complicates. The word stung, but I let it settle. Love isn't supposed to be simple, I said. It's supposed to be steady. I've been steady all my life. For him, for this family. And in return, I was left on the porch. My son finally spoke. "Dad, please, we don't want this to be a fight." "It's not a fight," I replied. "It's the truth. And the truth is, I will no longer pretend your silence is love." My grandson shifted in his seat. He looked at me, his eyes wide, and whispered, "Grandpa." But before he could say more, his mother's hand touched his shoulder. He went quiet. That small gesture said more than any words could. She wanted to control not just my place, but his voice. I straightened. "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to tell you what comes next. You closed the door on me. And with it, you closed the door on the things I built for this family. The savings, the sacrifices, the legacy." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening to cut us out?" I shook my head. Not threatening. Deciding. If I'm not welcome here in life, then I will not pretend in death. The check stays in the drawer. And when the time comes, so will the rest. My son's face went pale. "Dad, you don't mean that." "I do," I said quietly, "because I've learned something. Love given freely is a gift. Love demanded without respect is servitude, and I am not a servant." The words hung in the air. She crossed her arms tighter, but my son looked broken, caught between blood and vows. Finally I stood. "I came here today so you could hear from me, not through rumors or papers. I still love you. I will always love him. But I will not spend the rest of my days begging for a chair at a table I helped build." For a moment, no one moved. Then my grandson whispered again, almost too softly to hear, "Grandpa, I love you." I felt my throat tighten, but I forced a small smile. I love you too, son. And then I turned and walked out. The door closed behind me. But this time, it didn't echo like defeat. It sounded like resolution. Driving home, I expected to feel hollow. Instead, I felt steady. Sad, yes, but steady. For once, I hadn't let myself be silenced. At home, I opened the drawer, placed my hand on the envelope and the will, and said aloud, "It's decided." The house felt different after I spoke my truth. Lighter in some ways, heavier in others. Lighter because the words I'd carried in my chest for months were finally out in the open. Heavier because now there was no going back. Once truth is spoken, it doesn't fit back into silence. For 2 days, the phone didn't ring. I walked past it, daring it to buzz, daring them to reach out. It stayed black, still indifferent. The quiet wasn't peace. It was punishment. On the 3rd day, a message came. Short, sharp, from her. "You embarrassed us. The way you spoke in front of him was inappropriate. Please respect our household going forward." Respect. The word stung, twisted. Respect isn't shutting a man out. Respect isn't silencing a grandfather in front of his grandson. But to her, respect meant obedience. It meant knowing my place, and my place, according to her, was outside the door. I didn't reply. Later that evening, my son called. His voice was low, strained. "Dad, I wish you hadn't said all that in front of him." In front of him? I asked, "You mean in front of my grandson? The boy I've saved for, prayed for, showed up for? If there's anyone who deserves to know the truth, it's him." He sighed. "You don't understand. It just makes things harder here." Harder for who? I pressed. Silence. Then, softly, "For me." And that was the heart of it. He wasn't protecting me, or even his son. He was protecting his comfort. He didn't want waves in his house. Easier to sacrifice his father than disturb the waters with his wife. The fallout spread in small ways, too. At church the following Sunday, I noticed fewer smiles, fewer greetings. Word travels fast in families, faster still when pride is wounded. I wondered what version of the story they told. Probably that I was difficult, demanding, dramatic. Maybe even that I was greedy. No one had asked me for my side. They rarely do. That afternoon, I opened a drawer where the envelope and the will rested side by side. I stared at them for a long time. The check was love in numbers. The will was love in words. Both were mine to give, or not give. I whispered aloud. They've mistaken my giving for duty. They've mistaken my silence for weakness. They've mistaken my love for something they can turn on and off. And for the first time, I felt no shame in considering what I would take back. A few nights later, my phone buzzed after midnight. A text from my grandson. Just 3 words. "I miss you." I sat on the edge of the bed, reading it over and over. Tears blurred the screen. I typed back, "I miss you too. Always." Seconds later, Mom took my phone. "Sorry." Then silence. That short exchange meant more than the $10,000 ever could. It was proof that the bond wasn't entirely broken, that beneath the walls she built, there was still a boy who loved his grandfather. But it also deepened my resolve. If she could take his phone to stop his love from reaching me, what else would she take? His gratitude? His memory of me? His inheritance? Twisting it into her narrative of control? Not if I had anything to say about it. The fallout wasn't fiery. It was cold. Cold looks when we passed each other in town. Cold silences during family gatherings I wasn't invited to. Cold texts filled with polite words but absent of warmth. Yet, in that cold, I found clarity. The line had been drawn not by me, but by them. I had simply decided to stop pretending it wasn't there. I sat at my desk one evening, pen in hand, and began drafting a letter to Martin, my lawyer. Not the final instructions, that would come later, but notes, ideas. I wrote, scholarship fund in his name directly, bypassing parents. Donation to church. Charities Eleanor loved. Cut household from primary distribution. The list grew. With each line, I felt steadier. The fallout had shaken me, yes, but it had also freed me. freed me from the illusion that I had to keep giving to earn love. Love isn't earned with checks. Love is shared in presence. And since my presence wasn't welcome, I would no longer let my absence be filled with my labor. The next morning, another text from her. If you can't respect us, maybe it's best you keep your distance. Permanently. I read it 3 times, then slipped my phone back into my pocket. No reply. None needed. She thought distance was punishment. She didn't realize distance was where I'd already found my peace. That night, I placed my hand on the wheel. It's almost time, I whispered. Almost. The fallout had cost me my seat at their table, but it had given me back my dignity. And dignity, once reclaimed, cannot be taken again. The day I finally opened the drawer and lifted the envelope again, something felt different. For weeks it had been a symbol of rejection, a reminder that I tried to give love and been told I wasn't welcome. But in my hand that morning, it felt less like a wound and more like a choice. I turned it over slowly, tracing the edges with my thumb. $10,000. It could still change his life. But the question that weighed on me was, would it actually reach him, or would it be swallowed by the same walls that shut me out? The answer was clear. If I left the money in their hands, it wouldn't be love, it would be leverage. And love should never need permission to walk through the door. I set the envelope beside my will. For years, I told myself I didn't need to look at that document again. It was signed, sealed, finished, a map for when I was gone. But life has a way of reminding you that maps can be redrawn. That night, I poured myself a glass of Eleanor's favorite red wine and sat at the kitchen table. Her picture smiled at me from the wall. Steady as always. I'm going to change it, Ellie, I whispered. Not because I don't love them. Because love without respect is just charity. And charity can't buy a seat at a table that's already closed. The next morning, I called Martin. He'd been my lawyer for 30 years, helped me buy my first house, settled Eleanor's estate, and written the first draft of my will. When I told him I needed an appointment, he didn't press for details. He just said, "Come in tomorrow. Bring the old copy." I didn't sleep much that night. My mind was restless, flipping through memories like pages in an old photo album. I saw my son as a boy, running into my arms after a baseball game. I saw Eleanor carrying him on her hip, kissing his forehead, telling him he could be anything. I saw birthdays, Christmas mornings, graduations, all the moments that had made me believe family was unshakable. And then I saw that door closing in my face, the envelope in my hand, and her voice saying, "You're not welcome here." The contrast burned like fire. Martin's office smelled of leather and paper. I sat across from him, the old will folded neatly in my jacket pocket. He leaned back in his chair, glasses perched low on his nose. "So," he said, "what do you need changed?" I took a deep breath. "Almost everything." He raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. "I saved $10,000 for my grandson's education. I began, but when I tried to give it, I was turned away at the door. My daughter-in-law told me I wasn't welcome. My son said it was about boundaries. But what it was really about was control." Martin nodded slowly, his pen poised above the page. "I won't let what I built be handed over people who treat me like a nuisance. I want my legacy to mean something, to go to those who respect the weight of love, not just the weight of money." So we began. Line by line, we rewrote the story of my estate. Instead of everything flowing through my son and his wife, I arranged scholarships in my grandson's name, set aside donations to charities Eleanor had supported, and even established a small fund for the church choir that had sung at her funeral. For the first time in months, I felt like I was building something again, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Martin looked up halfway through. "Henry, are you sure? These are big changes." "I'm sure," I said, steady. "If they want me erased from their home, then they don't get to hold my name in their accounts." When the new draft was finished, I signed it. My hand didn't tremble. The ink flowed smooth, confident, final. As I slid the pen back across the desk, Martin said, "You know, this doesn't have to be the end. You can always change again if hearts change." I nodded. "Maybe, but I'm done waiting for their hearts to open while mine is breaking. On the drive home, the autumn leaves swirled across the road like fire. I rolled down the window and let the cold air sting my face. It felt like baptism, sharp, cleansing, necessary. That night, I placed a new will in the drawer. The envelope stayed there too, a reminder of both love and loss. I whispered again to Eleanor, "It's done. They may never understand, but I do, and that has to be enough." For the first time in months, I slept without dreaming of doors closing, because I had opened one of my own. I did not change my will because of hate. Hate is too small a word for something this heavy. I changed it because I finally understood that love without respect is a hollow thing, and legacy without gratitude is wasted. When I walked out of Martin's office with the new papers in my hand, I felt like a man carrying both an ending and a beginning. An ending to years of being treated as useful, but not welcome. A beginning to the peace that comes when you stop begging for scraps of affection. For weeks afterward, I found myself replaying the moment on the porch, the envelope in my hand, her eyes cold, the words, "You're not welcome here." That memory could have poisoned me if I let it. But instead, I decided to use it as a marker, a reminder that boundaries cut both ways. If I am unwelcome in their home, then they are unwelcome in the plans for my legacy. And strangely, that brought me comfort. I started writing more often, not journals this time, but letters. Letters to my grandson. Letters he might not see for years, maybe not until I am gone. In them, I told him the stories his parents won't repeat. The night I held him through a thunderstorm. The mornings I made him pancakes in shapes that never quite looked like animals but always made him laugh. The bike rides where he scraped his knees and got back up, braver each time. I wanted him to know who I was, not the version painted by silence or twisted by resentment, but the truth, a man who loved him fiercely, who sacrificed quietly, who only ever wanted to see him walk taller than the generation before. Each letter ended the same. You are loved, not for what you achieve, not for what you can provide, simply because you are mine. I sealed them in envelopes, dated them, and placed them in a drawer beside the will. Someday, when he opens that drawer, he will find more than numbers and signatures. He will find proof that love was always bigger than money. In the evenings, I began to sit on the porch again. Neighbors passed, waved, sometimes stopped to chat. They didn't know what battles had played out behind my quiet eyes. They just saw an old man sipping tea, watching the sun drop behind the trees. But in those moments, I realized something. Dignity doesn't need an audience. It just needs to be chosen. For too long, I had confused giving with belonging. I thought if I kept paying, kept fixing, kept showing up, I would always have a seat at the table. But belonging isn't bought, it's given freely. And when it's withheld, no amount of sacrifice can buy it back. That truth hurt, yes, but it also freed me. I began to notice little joys again. The way the air smelled after rain. The sound of the church bell on Sunday morning. The laughter of children playing down the street. These small things reminded me that life isn't measured only by who includes you, but also by what you choose to notice, what you choose to carry. Sometimes I would catch myself wondering if they miss me. If my son ever looked at the empty chair at the table and felt the absence. If my grandson ever asked why his grandfather didn't stop by anymore. Those thoughts still ached. But instead of letting the ache define me, I let it remind me that I had loved enough to be missed, even if they didn't admit it. And so, to anyone who hears this letter, I say this. If you have ever been shut out, if you have ever knocked on a door that once opened warmly only to hear the words, "You're not welcome here," know this, your worth is not defined by their acceptance. If you have given until your hands were empty, if you have sacrificed until your back ached, only to be treated as an obligation rather than a blessing, hear me. You are not wrong for wanting more. You are not wrong for drawing a line. You are not wrong for protecting the dignity that others try to strip away. The will is more than legal ink. It is my final story written in binding words. And I chose to write it not with spite, but with truth. They will discover someday that the inheritance they counted on was not theirs to command. Perhaps they will be angry. Perhaps they will feel betrayed. But maybe, just maybe, they will also pause and realize why. Because love without respect cannot be sustained. And respect without presence is no respect at all. I pray that when my grandson reads my letters, he will understand, that he will see his grandfather not as bitter, but as a man who finally stood for himself after a lifetime of giving, that he will take the lesson into his own life, to treat people as family not for what they provide, but for who they are. I keep that blank place card on my desk, the one I carried from the day she shut the door. At first, it felt like a symbol of exclusion. Now it feels like a promise that I will always claim my own seat, even if no one sets it for me. Across it, in bold letters, I finally wrote one word, me, because if you don't claim your place, someone else will decide you don't have one. That was his letter, and as I read it, I realized it could have been written by so many of us. Fathers, mothers, grandparents, all those who gave, only to be forgotten when the giving stopped. So tonight, as I fold these pages and place it with the others, I leave you with this. Family is not proven by blood. It is proven by presence. By who pulls up a chair for you when the table is full. By who asks for your company when they could just as easily ask for your labor. Protect your dignity. Protect your chair. And if someone tells you you're not welcome, remember, you still hold the pen. You can still write your own name.